Okay, so thank you for clicking over to part 2. We're just going to get right into it, of course. The topic of discussion here is the massive domestic battle between junior featherweight titleists Scott Quigg and Quigg-Frampton. It's obviously a big unification fight, but even more than that, without the titles on the line, it's a big fight. It's a fight that has just been simmering. It's been sitting there, waiting to be made, with virtually no one inside capable of making it. But now, after 3 years, maybe even 4, the fight doesn't even need to be made. It needs to be finalized. Everything is in order. Quigg has a decent following. Obviously, Frampton has a great following, especially in his native Ireland, Northern Ireland, Belfast in particular. They both have titles. They're still undefeated. While they've always been fairly complimentary of one another, and they don't seem to hate each other, there's not bad blood necessarily between the two. Competitively speaking, the pair are fed up with one another. They don't seem to really like each other professionally. They want to prove they are superior, better than the other. That has all the makings of a great fight, and that has certainly laid out everything that a fan could want in terms of a fight of this sort. You know, it has the domestic feel. It has world level implications. There's a bit of anger and hostility between the pair, but again, it's not so over the top that you expect to see them make a mockery of the sport during the promotional run or anything like that. It should be a fairly professional, well-handled fight. And of course, I, like any other fan, want to see the fight. I mean, there's just no, two ways about it. If you're a boxing fan, this is an interesting fight. You have a bruising, come-forward brawler who has some power, a little bit of speed in Scott Quigg, and you have a guy who has a lot more speed, pretty decent power himself, seems to fight more from the outside in Quigg-Frampton. It's a very good fight on paper. It has all this sort of outside-the-ring implications, in terms of what it will do for their careers. You have fans on both sides there that certainly believe their guy's going to win. And there's only one problem. While all of this is laid out, it's right there. The fruit is ripe, nearly ready to fall from the tree. All you have to do is reach up and grab it. There seems to be, and again, maybe I'm just a pessimistic, jaded bastard. As a matter of fact, I'm sure I am. But with all of this having been said, there's still this tiny little part of my withered up little black heart that says, you know what? I fear this fight won't happen. And look, I'm not trying to put any bad vibes out there, okay, man? I'm not trying to jinx it, man. I'm not trying to bad will this fight into not happening. I want it to happen. I hope and pray. I pray to my boxing god, also known as, Alexis Arguello, that this fight happens. I want it to happen. I just don't know if it will. And there's a lot of course, political reasons as to why this fight might happen. Of course, you have to contemplate how Frampton and his team will view going into a deal potentially, which would certainly happen, I would imagine, on Sky Sports. Maybe they feel like they'd be treated like the B-side when financially, in terms of live gate, in terms of fans, what have you, they could well be considered the A-side. Quigg, on the other hand, is the Sky fighter. He does have the connection to the guy that effectively, as boxing goes, runs the network. It's very difficult to see that it would be they would both be considered 50-50 as it pertains to the live gate, just as it pertains to the network. One could make an argument that Frampton might feel as though he's getting a bit of the shaft that way, and I don't know if I totally blame him. I could see how at least one could perceive that to be the case. Doesn't mean it would happen that way, but I could see it happening. It wouldn't totally shock me. I know there's some political things in terms of promotional companies. Of course, Frampton is signed to Cyclone, which is Barry McGuigan's promotional outfit, and Barry McGuigan is certainly a guy that you would love to have in your corner if you're a fighter, because he fights for everything, and he makes sure that he takes the best care of you possible. He seems to really have a passion for guiding his fighter, at least in this case, Quigg-Frampton, to the spot that he's currently in. That being said, I think that passion could potentially stand in the way as well as, let's put it this way. If everything was 50-50, They both had the same amount of fans. They had the same drawing power. They were fighting regularly on the same network. They had the same promoter. Let's just say Barry McGuigan was the manager, let's say, of Frampton. I'd still be left with the impression that if there was a side of this equation that might stop a fight from happening based on one little thing in a contract that they're not totally fond of, it would be Team Frampton. And again, this is not to say they don't want the fight. I don't think Frampton has anything to fear. I don't, insofar as who wins, inconsequential to whether or not you fear a fight. I don't know who would win the fight. It's too far out in terms of the fight for me to give my prediction. I like to be under the gun in terms of my predictions. I tend to give the best predictions when I'm doing it sort of last minute, the week of the fight. That's just maybe the way I operate. I don't know. But despite who might win the fight or who would win the fight or whatever, I don't think Frampton is afraid of the fight. And there's certainly a lot of money that could be involved in this fight that would make most men quite easily get over their fears. But I do feel that if there is one side that wants the fight negotiations to go one particular way without any variables standing in the way, that would be Team Frampton. They seem to be the team that want things this way with A, B, C, and D in place, and ain't nothing changing about that. And I'm not even saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. Boxing teams that tend to have that sort of mentality tend to get the very most that their fighters can get. Sometimes they put themselves in positions where they miss the mark a little bit because they wait too long or they do things too early. But when you are the draw, you do have a bit of power in that respect. So it's probably not going to hurt Frampton that they meticulously construct his career. It'll probably work out fine. My only concern is that it potentially stops this fight from happening. And they're both in a division that is quite dangerous. Many a thing could happen. Frampton could fight Santa Cruz, Quigg could fight Santa Cruz, and it wouldn't be the most astronomical upset if either guy were to lose to Santa Cruz. It certainly wouldn't be an upset if Gundial got to either of those guys before they got to each other. I think he probably beats both of them. And by probably, I mean definitely. And by definitely, I mean it's a lock. I would bet my house on it. The fact is, many things could happen in this division that would potentially take away all the luster of this fight if it doesn't happen now. It's a very crowded division. And any fight other than, for Frampton, let's say, Quigg, Santa Cruz, or Gundial, is pretty much a step back. And the same can be said for Quigg in relation to Frampton, Santa Cruz, or Gundial. Any fight there is a step back. And it doesn't matter what your excuse is. Oh, they didn't want to fight. They weren't being reasonable, this, that, and the third. The fact of the matter is, fans want to see those fights. All four of these guys have a unique set of skills that would make for very interesting fights. I still don't think any of the three want to fight Gundial, and they shouldn't, because he would probably take away very, very big chances of making much more money and much more winnable fights down the line. But I do think it could add some intrigue to any potential fight. Wouldn't be the biggest fight out there, but it might be the most interesting to a certain extent, depending on who you happen to be a fan of. And fans are not going to put up with this idea, this notion, that, well, maybe they just can't make the fight, so in the end, we just have to settle for them making the mandatory defenses, bringing up a couple fighters that are moving up from bantamweight. We'll take what we can get here. They're good enough fighters. It'll be fine. Frampton might be able to have that be the case. He's a big enough draw that I think his fans would tune out to see him take on some subpar guys and get some fairly easy wins. But boxing as a whole would not be interested in seeing that for far too long. I mean, maybe one defense is a sort of congratulations, you got the title, but really, his victory over Kiko Martinez was sort of that. It was, to me anyway, I sort of expected him to win that fight pretty handily, which he did. He really didn't have many troubles. It was a tough fight. He had to be on his toes, in a sense, for the duration of the contest, all 12 rounds, but it wasn't as though I ever got the suspicion that Frampton was in great danger of losing. Martinez did better to me, to a certain extent, than he did in the first fight, in that he gave himself a better chance. He seemed better prepared, and he seemed more determined to keep his title. But it didn't feel as though, let's say, for more than 2 rounds in that fight, that Frampton was in any real jeopardy. Maybe 2 rounds you could give to Martinez and say, wow, he strung together a couple of punches, a couple of rounds maybe. Okay, maybe he's going to make a late rush here, an early rush here, whatever the case may be. But the fact of the matter is, Frampton was in control of that fight from bell to bell, and it was more a ceremony of crowning a new titleist than it was a legitimate fight that would determine who's, the guy at 122 pounds. But I don't think fans are going to accept that. That's my point. I think these guys need to start fighting each other now. You got 4 guys undefeated, all with claims to a title at least, or in Rigondeaux's case, the legitimate championship. These fights do need to happen, and I hope they happen sooner rather than later, while there's still some meat on the bones that are these fights. In any event, I'd love to hear your guys' take on the fights. Who do you have winning Quigg versus Frampton? You a Quigg guy, a Frampton guy? It seems as though at least most of the people that are in my sort of network on Twitter seem to be going with Frampton by a landslide. I'm not totally sold on that being the outcome. I'm not saying Frampton doesn't win, but I don't know if it's going to be as handily as many people suspect. I mean, I've been seeing words like embarrass, like he's going to embarrass Scott Quigg. And I'm not so sure I totally agree with that by any means. I'm a pretty big supporter of both guys, particularly Quigg, to be honest with you, but that still doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to pick Quigg for that matter either. Fact of the matter is, both are very skilled fighters. Love to hear your take on who you think's going to win, and would you rather them fight someone like Santa Cruz or Rigo? What do you think about those fights in terms of Santa Cruz and Rigo? Who do you think wins that fight? Love to hear all your stuff, all your picks and selections, of course, and your predictions, and do you think the fight's going to happen in the first place? Of course, leave all that stuff in the comments, or hit me up on Twitter at 12RounderBoxing. And, of course, like, comment, share, all that sort of stuff. Subscribe, of course. Love to hear back from you guys. And quickly, in terms of the schedule, we have a couple of fights coming up this weekend. We have a card featuring Kid Galahad and Adam Etches. That'll be taking place in Sheffield, also on that side of the pond. In London, you have George Groves making his return against Frenchman Christopher Rabrasi. So those fights will be taking place. A pretty good fight. Pretty good fight weekend if you're someone that speaks English with an English accent. In any event, tell me what you think of the upcoming fights as well. I'd love to hear back from you guys. So, check out the links in the description, and until next time, enjoy the fights.